Imagine this, you're awake in the middle of the night watching your brother sleepwalk as he's done countless times before, but tonight, it's different. He's headed into the cornfield again, but this time there's something off about it. You decide to follow him, but what you find out in the field doesn't make any sense. A bright light, figures with featureless faces, and a strange peace that pulls you in like a magnet. What happens next? It's something he still can't explain to this day. Hello, I'm Erudite and welcome to Moonskull. If you're looking for tales of horror, the paranormal, sci-fi, and the unexplained, then you are in the right place. I know you 5,000 wonderful fear addicts, as well as the 30% of you closet horror buffs who is still not subscribed, are eager to get into the story I just mentioned, so let's dive into Brian's chilling encounter. Brian had always been close to his younger brother. They lived in a sprawling family farm, far removed from the nearest town. Life on the farm was slow and steady, but there was always something strange about the way his brother would sleepwalk at night. Every night, like clockwork, his brother would rise from the bed, wander through the house, and make his way out into the cornfields. No one knew why, no one could explain it. It was just something that had been happening for years, ever since they were kids. Brian had never thought much of it, until one night, when everything changed. It was around midnight when he heard the usual creak of the floorboards above him. His brother was up again, sleepwalking towards the back door, and Brian, out of curiosity, decided to follow him this time. Quietly, he slipped out the door and crept up behind him through the yard toward the distant cornfields. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of the earth, and the only sound was the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. Brian moved silently, barely able to see his brother's silhouette ahead of him in the dark. The moonlight was dim, but just bright enough for him to catch a glimpse of his brother's figure moving steadily into the field. Suddenly, he saw it. A bright light, shining deep within the rows of corn, flickering like a distant star, but it was much too close, much too bright. Brian froze, staring into the unnatural glow. His brother walked towards it. His movements were slow, but purposeful, as if he was drawn in, as if he had no control. Then the figures emerged. At first, Brian couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. Tall, lean figures with pale, featureless faces standing perfectly still. Their limbs were unnaturally long. Their bodies were impossibly thin. There was no mistaking it. They weren't human. Before Brian could react, the figures stepped forward, reaching out and gently pulling his brother into the light. His heart raced. Panic surged through him as he took a step forward, shouting his brother's name. "Stop!" Brian yelled, his voice cracking in the stillness. But then, something unexpected happened. The figures turned to him, their faces unreadable, and for a moment, Brian felt an overwhelming sense of peace. A calmness settled over him, wrapping around his chest like a warm blanket. Fear melted away. He didn't want to fight. He didn't want to run. The figures didn't feel threatening anymore. If anything, they felt reassuring. One of the figures extended his long arm and gently grasped Brian's wrist, pulling him into the light as well. He didn't resist. He didn't even try. The next thing he remembered was the cold. It wasn't the cornfield anymore. He wasn't on the farm. He was somewhere else entirely, somewhere metallic. The sensation was strange and foreign and somehow wrong. He could feel sharp, cold stings in his neck, like a needle piercing into his skin. His body felt numb, and his mind foggy. He couldn't focus on anything long enough to make any sense of it. When Brian woke up the next morning, he found himself back in his own bed, drenched in sweat. His body ached as though it had been through some kind of physical trial, but his mind felt empty. He couldn't remember what had happened during the night. The last thing he could recall was being pulled into that blinding light. His brother was still there, asleep in the next room, but something was different. Something was wrong. From that night forward, his brother never sleepwalked again. The strange phenomenon that had haunted him for years just disappeared, like it was erased from his life entirely. But Brian couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to him, something that he couldn't explain. He felt violated in ways that words couldn't describe. The memory of the light, the figures, and the cold sting on his neck. It was all so vivid, yet all so distant. He never told anyone about it. Not his parents, not his friends, not even his brother. He wasn't sure if they'd believe him, and to be honest, he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. But every now and then, when the sun set and the wind picked up in the fields, Brian would feel that same cold, eerie presence creeping up from the corners of his mind. And he couldn't help but wonder, what had truly happened that night, and why had his brother never sleepwalked again? And there you have it, folks, a haunting tale of a seemingly ordinary night that turned into a chilling nightmare out in the cornfields. What do you think happened to Brian and his brother? Were the beings in the cornfield truly supernatural, or was it something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want more of this kind of wild paranormal real-life madness, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe, because we got plenty more where this came from. I'm Arudai, and until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't explain.